System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
Today is July 11th. My name is Amin TMK for Inner City Left, alongside my co-contributor, Emoja Lil Tanky Sumler. How are you doing on this hot July day, my friend?
Yo, co-contributor, not co-conspirator. Woo.
Yeah, you see how I'm trying to get the, what do you call it, the like neutral language out there, you know what I'm saying?
Lord knows. We in the heart of the belly of the beast in the presence of the world's greatest military alliance the world has ever known. Don't you feel safer?
Yeah. So what you're alluding to is the NATO summit is being held currently here in Washington, D.C., right in our backyard. I was out and about in the city yesterday, and every other lane is closed, and every undercover officer ever is down there. It is absolutely crawling with feds. And it's just a nightmare. I mean, it really is. This city is actually not built to have these types of large, gatherings of diplomats and world leaders. It's just not that type of city.
You would think, right? You would think DC would be made specifically for that, but it really isn't. It doesn't have the infrastructure of like a New York City or
any of the major cities, any of the major northeastern cities, Chicago, any of the major cities, in the West Coast,
cozy, right? Like in a way that like Boston is never. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on and go on, but let's let you know, like, we're here, like we are seeing this, we're witnessing this firsthand, and we're being affected by it. So let's talk about what's happening at this summit. I know we talked about this briefly when it was, what was the before the peace conference?
Yeah.
And I was watching the peace conference and I was telling you, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't a peace conference. It's a war conference.
It's a war council, yeah.
And I just sort of left it in the,
I just don't understand what the rules are. So like, why the fuck is Zelensky there at all? Like, you're not a member of NATO, bro. Like, you go around, we're all, and it's so funny, right? That like the American press secretary was like, Joe Biden's going to a big boy conference. Like, bro, you understand it right now? Everybody feels like he's being infantilized. Using this kind of language is not helpful.
Yeah, I read in the Washington Times, they said Biden delivers speech without gaffes.
It was 5 minutes long.
Yeah,
meanwhile, Putin talking to fucking Tucker Carlson for 3 hours, and then the first, war of, dear God, man, breaking down what happened in the original, where's the contested strip of land,
Crimea.
Yeah, the whole Crimean War. He's breaking this down, right? We're supposed to be happy that Joe Biden can make it through 5 years.
We weren't really doing shows during that whole Tucker Carlson interview. But it is a bit disappointing to see like how many people view this person as like some sort of bastion of journalism, when he's been really. I don't want to get too far and too deep into this.
Willing to overlook anti-blackness, right? That's not like a serious thing that should disqualify you from being in a job,
right?
So Tucker Carlson can meet his racist POS all the time. All these people that do geopolitics are like, the great Tucker Carlson's like, whatever, man.
Yeah, you're right. They always overlook anti-blackness. It's never even really discussed, I mean, that's a fact.
They all have it and they don't want to disqualify themselves,
Exactly.
We have to indict ourselves, which brings us right back to the NATO summit, right? I think the funniest thing to me has been watching all of this snitching, just straight up dry snitching. Like day one, Macron, who's lost pretty much everything, the leftists have taken over in France. And, he thought he was going to lose it to the fascists, which was actually a little bit better. Like, oh, well, Le Pen's, my time has come. Oh, my God, the leftists,
what have we done?
What have we done, right? And he goes in, he's like, hey, I just want y'all to know, France, all of NATO is combined. We all want Ukraine to join. It's just the United States and Germany be hating, right? And Zelensky's right there, right? Just like,
just let you know, like how awkward like how many, what do they call them? Like strange bedfellows are all together here. You have someone who's, basically a Nazi sympathizer there. You have German officials who obviously, have that history. And it seems as if Joe Biden seems to be like sort of, I don't want to say lording over this conference, but it's sort of the elephant in the room. Is he going to be here next year? Is NATO going to have the same funding when Donnie J comes in? It seems like there's as many questions, at this summit than there, I guess, answers.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we have things that are happening, right, that are moving forward these timelines of all of our destruction, right? So you have Stoltenberg go up, and he's actually on his way out. So why is he giving speeches, talking about, the worst thing would be to let, Ukraine fall. We cannot allow Russia to win. Well, my question is, what are you prepared to do to make Russia not win? Because as I'm playing out these scenarios, and again, I'm just a guy that looks at the board. I look at the forces that exist. I look at the capabilities that exist, but I'm not an insider. If they got some kind of special super conspiracy theory weapon that I don't know about, maybe, then maybe they do got options. But based upon the stuff that they admit that they have on the ground, the stuff that they've used, there are no options to ensure that Russia doesn't win in Ukraine, bar that one that nobody wants to see used, period. And Russia got them too. Oh, and more, and better delivery systems. So it's this complete, right? As we talk about all of these people acting like Joe Biden is a competent leader, the gaslight is all that's happening at NATO anyway, right? Because they're all delusional and believing there's still things that we can do to keep Russia from winning in Ukraine. If there were things that could be done, they would have done them.
It's like that movie You and Muscle, like Pacific Rim, but it doesn't have to be that one. It's just like they pull out the super weapon at the very end, and they're like, "Why didn't you open with that?" That's what would happen if they have some seventh generation weapon. Is they would use it to win, and that's the
be me lord. I mean, what?
Yeah. And then it kind of goes, I think it also goes back to sort of the naivete of Americans. And we talk about this often, we had that one comment on our Instagram at Inner City Left. Please follow us on Instagram if you're on there. We upload daily. But anyway, the comment was, America could beat Russia and then the next 50 most powerful states together. And it's just so silly, because what even is that? What even is winning? If Russia has Kinjal missiles placed in Cuba that they can shoot off, what is a win?
Not even the scariest thing they could have there, right? Without even looking at nuclear weapons, right? The Zircon is even faster than the Kinjal. These are extraordinary missiles that they have. They're better than American missiles. This is just undeniable as far as where we are in military tech right now. China and Russia have better missiles than America. America has better planes, but it's
something called parity.
It's parity,
and that's
the best of everything and anything.
Yeah, it's not a game. It is a game, but it's a game where people die, and you don't want to play a game. It's like, anyway, I think it's just interesting because I just wanted to read some of the things here. Deploying these long-range missiles to Germany, 40 billion euros in aid for Ukraine. I wonder if Europe can use some of that money. And also one more thing, and I know we haven't talked about this, but there was a lot of conversation surrounding China as well.
Of course.
And it just seems more and more, and I hope people start to see this. I'm seeing more and more people question NATO, but it just seems like all the countries that aren't white seem to be the ones that are on the ire of NATO. Those countries don't get in to NATO. Or perhaps they don't get into the
Turkey,
EU,
which they had to have, right? Turkey had to be part of NATO,
but not the EU.
Exactly.
And that's a slap in the face.
Yeah, you can be part of our military, but you can't be part of our culture.
Yeah,
Look,
and
I think this is one thing that we dance around this, but the fact is, on February 9th, 1990, the United States Secretary of State James Baker straight up told Gorbachev when the Soviet Union is in the process of dismantling, there's some things you don't have to worry about. He guaranteed that NATO's jurisdiction of its troops would not spread east of the present boundary, not 1 inch. These were promises that the Americans made. The Secretary of State. The only thing farther than that is the president. You know?
yeah. I mean, you can go earlier than that to the Minsk Accords. The Minsk agreements. Like
Well, that's later. That's later.
That's what I'm saying. What I meant to say was more recent.
Right.
Because this is what happens. America agrees to a thing, and then they don't follow through with it. That's just what they do. They do bad business.
Goodwill. There's no goodwill.
Yeah.
There's no reason to
No
believe
trust.
because you violated your trust. Like America is a perpetual line crosser, and it has to be acknowledged. You cannot understand the Ukrainian conflict without understanding what James Baker said to Gorbachev. So the Russians, they're like, all right, well, if it's going to be like that, we'll let Ukraine be based on these boundaries because we don't have to worry about it. As the United States reneged on these promises, like Russia has to reevaluate their entire security complex and make decisions based upon that. Look, geopolitics is not nice. It is not pretty. It is real. What can power hold, right? What do I have to do to stay safe? That is geopolitics. No permanent allies, permanent interest. That is geopolitics. The moment the United States started playing games with this, and again, it can't another place where you can look at is when the Americans were being helped by the Russians in their Afghanistan conflict, right? Providing intelligence, providing them with these are the tribal leaders to talk to, helping them with logistics. I mean, they did quite a lot, right? And meanwhile, the United States is trying to sneak in intermediate missile defense into Georgia. So Russia goes to war with Georgia. Putin, at this time, famously reaches out to George Bush and he's like, look, I want to say to your face, what we've been saying behind your back, you are not acting like a friend. We are helping you in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, you're compromising our security. Like, it's not, people love, first off, one of the things I see the most in geopolitics that just is infuriating to me is you don't have to like Putin. You can hate him, in fact. But to compare Putin to Hitler is just, it's so patently dehistorical that it's gross. 30 million Russians died fighting the Nazis. It doesn't take a mystical, magical understanding of why Putin has a particular hatred for Nazis, period. 2,997 Americans died in September 11th. And a huge percentage of the population they associate this with Islam. They'll never forgive Islam as a religion. They don't trust people that are Islamic. Now make that 30 million. Imagine 30 million. In fact, America's population is so much larger than Russia's, you'd have to double that number. So now think about 60 million Americans died on 9/11. 20 years later, do you think Americans are going to be cool with that? 40 years later, 70 years later. It's just in this fast food, American quick consciousness culture where everything in next week is some new thing and we care about that. Not every culture runs like the West. Not every culture runs like the Americans. The Russians haven't forgotten. And the one thing they will not tolerate, as bad as NATO is straight up Nazis on their borders. They're just not going to do that.
And it just goes to show how many G words and how much mass death follow the Americans and follow their plans. And that's what we're seeing, obviously, in the other big news story in the world, which is obviously Gaza.
Because that's going to be a thing. I do want to say one more thing that came out of the NATO conference that I think is really important. Poland has signed a bilateral agreement with the Ukrainians to provide missile defense. So this is complicated for a couple of reasons, right? One, Poland is using NATO missiles. Poland is a NATO member. As we have already discussed, NATO missiles are not as accurate. How about this? They're not up to the task of dealing with Russian missiles. Russian missiles The tech is past them. It's too fast, right? So now you're in this situation where missiles can be inbound, headed to Ukraine, and then Poland, a NATO member, fires air defense into this theater of war. And now it presents Russia this very interesting thing. Is like, well, is NATO firing on us or is Poland firing on us, right? How far does this bilateral agreement go, right? Never mind the fact that it assumes that these missiles would hit, which I don't have that assumption. So now you have just surface to air missiles in the air that have missed their target. And that's very dangerous. A large percentage of people are saying what ended up happening in Ukraine was a surface to air missile hit the children's hospital, trying to hit a Kinjal, right? And it was too embarrassing to acknowledge. So it's like, oh, we got to say that the Russians did it. But worse, what happens if the Polish do hit the missile, right? What happens if Russia sees Poland as a contributor, right? A contributor to the hostility and fires on that surface to area missile site, right? We're in a very provocative place because does this trigger in Article 5? Does this force all the rest of the NATO forces to come to the defense of Poland? It's not hard to see that the rhetoric will be Poland has a right to defend itself, even though Poland in this situation is being the aggressor by firing on someone that's not firing on them, right? Like these are really interesting questions, and they're questions that can lead to World War III, right? And jingles aren't going to save you. You aren't going to be like, oh, Poland has the right to defend itself, because what you're saying is you don't care if nuclear war happens. That's what that means. That's all I had on the NATO thing.
Yeah, it seems like everywhere the West turns, they don't have the equipment. They don't have the political backing, and also it seems as if the West is not really interested in. They're just waiting for a casus belli of their own. Whether they do it or someone else does it. I mean, they can't do it. They can't. They're trying to agitate as much as possible. So it just seems that there's always this, new machination of how a casus belli could occur. And they just happen like every few weeks. You have to remember we were talking about the strikes against the early nuclear detection system, a nuclear weapon detection system. So it's just a long list. It's just a long list of escalations. You know what I'm saying?
More than escalations, provocations. They're trying to bait Russia. And, that was the thing that Xi said about Taiwan. Like, I feel like the Americans are trying to bait me into attacking Taiwan. Like, they're doing things that are so provocative. It's almost like they want me to, and that's the thing is like, I think the Russians and the Chinese understand no one wins that war, right? The Americans think not only can they win it, they can decisively win it and maintain their place as the hegemon of the planet. And I think the Russians and the Chinese see this more as, in classic Sun Tzu terms, right? Stall your enemy, delay your enemy, evade your enemy, right? And that's what they're doing. They're playing for time because they understand, honestly, the thing that's going to bring this hegemon down is probably economics. I mean, you can't, we're talking about $80 trillion of debt. Like, just the interest payments on that will give you a nosebleed. Like, sooner or later, that golden cow is going to die. And if you can wait for that, that is much more certain than any type of military engagement on a nation-to-nation level with 3 different incredibly powerful militaries that are armed with state-of-the-art nuclear weapons.
Cool. You want to pivot to the second part?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so we talked about this on our last podcast, but I thought it was really interesting because the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I was just like, this whole war has just been, disgusting revelation after another one. You're watching a G word, and there's nothing but horrific images and horrific things that come out of that. And you're seeing now that this entire narrative of October the 7th, where Hamas came in and killed 1,100, 1,200 people, or whatever they call it, whatever the number was, 29/11s or whatever Benjamin Netanyahu said. And we're finding out more and more, I mean, from this Haaretz article, which is, an Israeli publication, seeing that most of the people that were killed because of this this quote unquote Hannibal directive, which sees, and we've talked about this too, about hostages being a liability, because what those hostages do then is give Hamas or whatever your opposition is leverage. So they didn't want those hostages to survive. And we're seeing now that many of the people, and in my estimation, this is just a guess. I study this every day, but it's just a guess. Israel killed more of their own people on October 7th than Hamas did, because Hamas was trying to get as many hostages as they could, because they want to release the 10,000 plus hostages, or, they call them incarcerated or whatever. So it's looking more like October 7th was committed really, truly by the Israelis, as well as that Nova concert where people were being gunned down by an Apache helicopter. I want you to touch on that, but also today I'm seeing the U.S. is resuming, I think we talked about this this morning, the 500-pound bombs. They're back on the menu, boys. What's your reaction to this?
It's a couple of things. I mean, so a 500, that's the equivalent of like the Russians use Fab 250s, 250 kilogram warheads, and they're just smart bombs, and you just set them with DPS, and they got like little wings, and they fly and they blow them up. The Americans use similar. They call them the JDAMs. The Americans have JDAMs, and so again, the operative word is it's a 500-pound explosive charge. That's not what you use to kill one person. It's just not. It's not. It's not. It's a hammer. It's not a scalpel. A 500-pound bomb is a hammer. It's not a scalpel. It's always going to be messy, and it's going to kill a lot of people. I mean, it's just no way around it. And that's just the reality of that. I think another thing that's really so the Hannibal directive. I don't want to get bogged down on what was the percentage, right? What was the percentage, whether more Israelis died because of the Hannibal directive or less. What is operative is the Hannibal directive more than likely was utilized. And that in and of itself, that's the story to me. Because whether you're talking about 1% of those people.
They said it was cool.
The government decided it was okay to kill civilians. I mean, this should be a huge story. It should be all over Western news. There's no story about it at all on CNN. There's no story about it at all on Fox. Even PBS, right? All of these quote unquote liberal news stations, none of that is there. The fact that the Netanyahu and his Israeli government gave the okay to use lethal force against their own citizens. That should terrify everyone. That's way more scary to me than Hamas. The fact that this government decided, yeah, it's okay, fuck it, kill them. I mean, that's terrifying, right? So the percentages for me, that's a fool's errand. No one's ever going to really be able to know. It's been more than a year since it's like we can know who blew up the Nord Stream, but you're never going to be able to prove it, right? It's too much time.
Right. It ain't what you know, it's what you can prove.
And that's the reality, right? We know that the Hannibal directive, someone gave the order, and more than likely it had to be Bibi Netanyahu. How many got killed is irrelevant. The fact is the government decided it was okay to kill its own people. That should be one of the hugest stories in the news today, and it's just not. And I find that fascinating, right? Because it presents a lot of interesting situations. It's like, at what point, right, do you have to acknowledge at some point, some of those Israelis probably went into Gaza to escape friendly fire like that. So now what are the implications, right? People that might have gotten away on their own accord, however, because there's an Apache gunship in the air or a tank bearing down on you, firing, you ran left instead of running right because you're just panicking. And oh my God.
How many Apache helicopters does Hamas have?
None.
Yeah.
None.
It was so funny because, they have these, we watch these press conferences with whether it's the White House or the State Department or DOD. We sit down and we watch them and they're boring. But once in a while you see some fireworks in there. And, the guy, Saeed, I don't know his last name, but he's always asking the question. They're like, oh, why did I call on this person? And he basically asked him about this. And
he was Schmirky.
Yeah, what's his Matthew Miller.
Squidward, as you say.
Squidward, yeah.
Squidward.
Oh my God. And he was like, does this change your viewpoint on October 7th and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, boy, oh boy. He said, boy, oh boy. I did not see that in Harrod's report, even though he said he glanced at it. And he was like, oh, no, Hamas is the one that did it. And I'm like, but
I don't think we have any questions. Why don't you have questions?
Yeah, I mean, they don't seem to do any. Oh, we're going to investigate into that. No, you're not. It seems like all of these press secretaries, whether, like I said, the State Department or White House or DOD, they're all just full of it.
About restoring democracy, but you have a White House press corps that doesn't even tell the truth to the press. I mean, it's fascinating.
It's not even that. It's a bold-faced lie. It's easily disproven.
Yeah.
Just want to say we are on Instagram at Inner City Left. Shout out to the podcast listeners. We're everywhere you find podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, all of those good things. We want to give a big shout out to our Patreons, patreon.com/InnerCityLeft. We have Jay, Ghoul, Art, No Ground, Robbie, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, Dennis. If you want to be a part of that and you have your shirt on?
You already know I'm repping.
Yeah, hardly home, but always repping. I love it.
Inner
City Left. Shirts available as well. Anything you want to say before we jump off here, my good friend?
Man, we stand at the pause. You know what I'm saying? It's like watching Barrow go through the Caribbean, man. RIP to everybody that lost their lives to that terrible storm. Again, global warming is something that is completely preventable, and overwhelmingly the science states that it's more than likely man-made. But what I'm looking at right now, that's that same little situation, is watching Israel flirt with this war with Hezbollah, man. That's the eye of the storm, because if Bibi really takes those troops out of Gaza, first off, Gaza is going to go right back to what it was. And all those Israeli soldiers will have died for nothing, which, hello, that's what it is. But what's waiting for them in the north, it's quite different. Yeah, little Bighorn feels.
Yeah, so many flashpoints. And you can always go check out some of our earlier podcasts where we go in depth into those. And we'll probably have to do another one of those coming up soon. Amin TMK, Emoji Little Tanky's Tumblr for Inner City Left. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.